now call the special meeting for Monday, June 24th to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Mosby.
Present.
Councilmember Vega.
Here.
Councilmember Cordova.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Dirk Starbuck.
Present.
Mayor Janelle Osborne.
Here. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Real quick before we get started, one, as you can see by the colorful garb that some of us are wearing, I just wanted to remind everybody about the Flower Festival, which I'm sure everyone knows, and that the annual parade would be this Saturday starting at 10 a.m. We hope everybody will come out for the parade. The more important one here for tonight, though, is that I made an error and I put actually item 3 and 2 need to be switched. Per state code, we need to adopt the appropriation limit first before we go into the budget piece. So when we get into it, if we can just reverse those two.
Okay, so we'll go 1, 3, 2.
Correct.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, first on the agenda is new business, council discussion of possible sales tax increase ballot measure. The recommendation to council to discuss a possible sales tax increase ballot measure and give direction to staff. I'll open the floor to council for discussion. Councilmember Starbuck.
Thank you. I asked for this to be one of the first things on the ballot because I wanted to kind of quell the hysteria that seems to plague some of the budget meetings. So, as I said, I've been working with Mr. Albro in finance, and I'd like to give you a big shout out in public, Mr. Albro, for helping me put this together. If you wouldn't mind, a very short little presentation, and I'm going to call it the City of Lompoc 1% sales tax measure. And I'm going to introduce this, and I'd like the council to take a look at it. And later on, I got confidence that this budget should finish itself tonight, and we can discuss this later on. We didn't get a chance to rehearse this.
Do we have handouts? Do we have handouts?
No, I didn't make handouts because I had a couple, but I got an email that said I had to provide 20 of them, and I don't have the capability of providing 20. So, and it's a very short presentation here, so to speak. So, there's a couple of items here I wanted to put on. This is what we intend to cover. I'm going to let Mr. Albro do the first one, the types of sales tax.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the type of sales tax. If you want it, the next one. I'll just go through them real quick. The length and time and use.
You're in the way of the computer.
Potential savings that we've talked about before. And then projected revenues.
Huh? Okay. And offset cost programs. Now, one of the things that everybody's been talking about is the 1% sales tax increase. Well, 1% ironically happens to work out at a pretty good figure for what the intent of a special tax would be. If you'll notice here, we've taken 75% of a special tax for long-term unfunded commitments. We've also left 0.25 here for general fund discretionary or as a measure against inflation later. "15-year sunset," which you can agree with me on this, please, Mr. Albro, is when is PERS peaking?
We'll talk a little bit about what that equates to, but on the next slide. Matter of fact, on the CalPERS here, you can see the different options for how to pay off your CalPERS debt. If you went to a 15, we could actually save about $27 million. So that would be the advantage of doing a 15-year, and that's how long it would take us to pay it off with that kind of sales tax and distribution.
Right, in a 15. One of the things you'll notice to the right on the 10 years, the 49 million that we could save, but I think it's almost too aggressive to expect that kind of revenue and that kind of growth and prosperity in the city to make the payments to do this in 10 years. So this is why I would propose the 15-year special on this.
And actually, the way it's set up, and it's all in a vacuum, if you will, we'd be probably a little bit faster than the 15-year, but it'd be pretty close.
Right. In a perfect world, we could do 12 or 13 years, but we're going to just compute it out at 15.
And that would generate about $85 million over the duration of that with a 2% growth rate.
Right. Just like the chart there. So 85 million, 15 years. Now, the interesting part here is what I'm going to call the potential offset program. Trying to keep money in Lompoc, and then people that really can't afford the 1% is actually a fairly big concern. It is with me. I'm sure it is with everybody in this room. These are true numbers, and there are several people that live in Lompoc that are living this kind of a life right here. You look at the bottom, what their annual cost is on this, it's $36 is all they're paying.
Yeah, if you look at this, and I thought this was the best part of working with Councilmember Starbuck is, you look at, I took the federal poverty level, and that was around $18,000 a year, and take it at that income level, most of your income is going to be spent on housing and food, so we estimated around 20%, or, and like Mr. Starbuck said, about $36 annually.
Several options to think about on this was the potential for utility offset program. Option 1, the general fund. A $3 monthly credit on your utility bill for residential only customers, but you would have to sign up to receive this rebate. Go to option 2, please, Dean. Option 2 is in the electric fund. A $2 monthly credit on your electric bill for residential customers. And these are estimated costs, mind you, underneath them. So these would be incentives for people that are really struggling and the tax would hurt the most. And I just wanted to throw these out there for people to see that what we can do good for the city, what we can do good for our lower income citizens. So for what it's worth, this would be my proposal, but I want to get through the budget. But I asked for this to be done so we didn't have the hour of we're killing people. We still need to pass a balanced budget tonight. So thank you again, Mr. Albro.
You bet.
Any additional commentary, questions before I open it to public comment? Councilmember Cordova.
I have a question. What happens after the 15-year sunset? Does it go back to council for?
Once a tax sunsets, it goes away. Just like recently, the state's educational tax, the 0.25 tax sunset, so it went from 8% to 7.75. It would be the same thing here. At that time, it would require a new tax to maintain that level or whatever. One of the things that's interesting in the city at that point is not only would we be over the hump with PERS, but our huge commitment in our wastewater, our $5 million annual payment comes due the final payment that same period of time. So basically 12 years from now would be a great time to be in Lompoc because the bills go away.
Okay. I just think that 15 years from now, we're not going to be in a better position in the sense, I mean, cost of living continues to go up, so I think that maybe if we left it for council to decide at the end of that 15-year period what they want to do, if they want to continue it and maybe allocate it or have it go to the voters at that time again for reallocation of those funds rather than just having it go away, because I don't think that we won't need the money 15 years.
That would absolutely be a council decision at that time, but I think that, 15 years is a realistic 1% gain. I talked with Mr. Albro at length about the fact that inflation is going to increase and pretty soon make 1% not what 1% is in this market now.
Right.
But on the other hand, it still gives us time for annexation, growth. Hopefully the low-income balance in town will balance out with median income, and we'll start receiving more sales tax revenue. Hopefully property tax values will increase. So the city's got to do its part to make this work also. But it's a good start for us now.
One more question. What would happen if miraculously the CalPERS debt was to kind of balance out at some point in time during that 15-year period and we were able to see maybe perhaps a surplus? What would we do with the funds at that time?
Either one.
There's a number of options. One of the things I kind of like is if we would have done this a long time ago before we started giving all these benefits away, is to put some of it in a 115 trust, something that it's irrevocable, it could only be used for pensions, but you could actually put it there so when you start seeing some bad weather, if you will, you could draw from it. So, I mean, that would be an option.
So we are never in this position again once we do have.
When we were 100%, 150% funded, if they would have said, okay, let's take that 50% and set it aside, that way when that recession hit, they could have said, okay, wow, we got some money, thank God, but instead everything went down. So.
Right. Okay. I think that would be something that I would want to see.
Any other questions or comments before I open it to public comment? Okay. Floor is now open for public comment. If you would like to speak on this matter, please step to the podium and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Ron Fink and I live in the city of Lompoc. Thank you, Councilman Starbuck. I think you did a lot of work there and I commend you for coming up with a reasonable solution to a difficult problem. As you know, I'm a member of the Santa Barbara County Taxpayers Association, and I would support allowing the people of Lompoc to vote on the temporary 1% sales tax measure. I think that perhaps a ballot question, such as the one used recently in Santa Maria, might help the voters to understand where the money is going to go. I realize that you have a plan up there. That's language that could be going there just so the voters know where the money is going to go. I would recommend a 20-year limit on it because, there's so much backlog of SIP work that needs to be, capital improvement plan work that needs to be done. Parks need to be improved and other things. I think that we could use that revenue to improve those resources to bring more people to town. The sunset, I like the idea of a defined sunset. If at the time that the sunset occurs, there's a need, the case could be made to the public and submitted again to the voters for a renewal, just like they did in Santa Maria. I would like to see an oversight committee as part of this, just make sure that the money gets spent where it's supposed to be spent. The membership I would suggest is one person from each council district, one at-large member, a certified public accountant, and an active member of a taxpayers association. Ultimately, the official position of the SBCTA on the new tax will be decided after a thorough analysis and discussion by the group, which starts this Thursday noon at the Hilton Garden Inn. If you want to attend the meeting, you're welcome to come. Just let me know so I can let them know how many people are coming, okay? Once again, thank you, Councilman Starbuck. This is a solution to a difficult problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is George King. I'm a citizen here at Lompoc. Nice to see our smiling faces up there tonight. I have a recommendation, but first of all, is this temporary budget already programmed, ready to discuss it this evening?
We're currently just discussing a possible sales tax, and then we'll move to the budget discussion. So these comments are to be focused on the discussion of a tax measure.
Okay, the reason I was asking is, you've seen all these hundreds of people here for the last 5 months, know what they're going to say. Can this budget be prepared, tell us now, let us hear this whole thing, then it is like or dislike, people can talk later, rather than having everybody stand up here for an hour, hear the same questions and comments we've had before for the last 4 or 5 months. So if somebody can do it and explain it in very simple terms, simple language, what the budget's about, how it's working out, the day-to-day access, what will happen with the retirement fund, the tax money being held away from the general sales and not going to the state. Once everybody gets to see the whole picture, then it's easy to come up here. If they don't know the whole picture, they'll keep coming up here. So if this whole thing can be processed and show everybody now, and let everybody see what's been happening, rather than waiting another budget meeting what we're not interested in. I just thought I'd bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nikolai Nikolenko, resident of Lompoc. I'm not in favor of a sales tax without some cuts being made to prove that we're taking their budget crisis seriously. We cannot keep raising our taxes, coming to the public for more money and more money and more money. That's not how the city is supposed to be run. 1% can eventually turn into 5%. And I just don't think that's fair to the citizens of Lompoc. We need some budget accountability, and I just think some cuts need to be made before we push a sales tax increase. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Justin Rouget, a 25-year resident of Lompoc, and I'm glad to see some discussion on the sales tax. Without the sales tax, the city is going to go bankrupt, and you know that. The sales tax is our only refuge that we can have in the future to solving our financial problems here. The state gave us this problem. The city's been well managed financially for years, but the state dumped this problem on us, and this is the only way we can solve it. Now, the proposal you're putting out is for a special sales tax, and that requires a 67% approval by the voters. I've sent you all my letter several times now and published it in the paper, and based on the information and recommendations from our information I've gotten from the city and the city attorney, you can solve your problem much easier by having a general sales tax, putting it on the ballot this year when you're not competing with all the other things that are going to be on the ballot next year. It'll be our own sales tax issue, it'll be a general sales tax, and you can, as a city council, determine where the money goes. There's nobody stopping you from doing that. The difference is that when you say it's got to be this and this, that becomes a special sales tax, and it requires a 67% approval by the voters. That's not so easy to get. The report that we got from the city manager showing all of the approved sales taxes in the state of California, all of those were general sales taxes, and they were all approved by 60-70%. And that's the approach we should be taking for, as I say in my letter, for the November 2019 election period. General sales tax at that time for our town without being confused with everything else that's going to be out there. And I think we're on the right track here, and I'm glad to see you've taken the initiative to bring this up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Charlie Martinez, Vandenberg Professional Firefighters and Lompoc resident. Thank you very much for bringing forth an option with the tax measure. I'll hold my enthusiasm to find out how you guys are going to vote, because we've had several tax measures that have been voted down. So I'm encouraged to see this brought up. It's worked with several cities, as I've said before. What do we do with the extra money? Let's invest it back in the city. By all means, let's put some money away for a rainy day. But we would have had $10 million by now if the last tax measure would have voted. We would have had $10 million to spend on our city, to keep our firefighters, buy maybe another fire station, get some more law enforcement officers, redo a lot of our parks, keep our libraries more open. We would have had a lot of money on this. I appreciate the comments of one of my fellow voters here who talks about not being taxed. I understand that. But the fact of the matter is, we don't live in this world. In Lompoc, we're not Santa Barbara, we're not Beverly Hills, we're just not there. So what do we do? I don't think we're here because we're just frivolously spending money on nothing, buying a bunch of stuff that doesn't mean anything. It's just the way we are here in Lompoc. And you guys have a tough job, I appreciate that, but it is what it is. If you don't have the tax bill, we're going to be right back here again, saying the same old song and dance. Okay, and again, the definition of insanity, it rings clear, because we were here 2 years ago. So I appreciate and I thank you for bringing that forward. I would highly encourage that we seek that, put it to the voters. And as leaders, if you see this being a good thing down the road for Lompoc, 15, 20 years down the road, be leaders and encourage that with your voters. Let's not talk this down and think it's somehow we're trying to rob the constituents of their $36. Okay, because that's numbers lower than what I had, and I was willing to do that. And I'm not rich, but public safety is important to me. The libraries are important to me, the parks are important to me, the hardworking employees of the city are important to me, and they should be important to the council, and they should be worth the investment, because I think they're worth every single nickel worth the investment for how hard they work for you and for the Lompoc residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Judy McKinnon, a more than 40-year resident. I've been up here many, many times talking about that 1 cent sales tax. Thank you, Mr. Starbuck, for finally bringing it up. It should have happened during the last ballot measure 2 years ago, when every other city in all of the counties around us had the common sense to do this. And they've been reaping the rewards ever since. So it's about time for this council to do your job and get that onto the ballot so we can start reaping the same reward that all of these other cities have. Another 1 penny on the sales tax is not going to break the poor people of Lompoc. But if we do not do it, it's going to break Lompoc. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Wally Waldo. I'm chair of the local March for Our Lives people. Yes, we do have a chapter of that national organization. I'm here to speak basically on behalf of the students. They deserve a well-staffed, adequately staffed police department and fire department. The whole town deserves that. Mr. Starbuck, you talk about growth. If people perceive that Lompoc is not a safe place to live because of an inadequate police department, if businesses don't perceive this as a safe place to have a business, already there are businesses that are planning to leave Lompoc because the police department doesn't have the staff to patrol in their area. Where's going to be the growth if people don't want to come here, if businesses plan to leave, if businesses don't want to come here because we're perceived as not being a safe place to live? And back to the students, they deserve a safe place to go to school. And if we don't have an adequate police department to respond in emergencies, then it's not going to be a safe place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here I am again, Ann Rouget, past city council member, a resident of Lompoc for about 25 years. Thank you, Mr. Starbuck, for coming up with a plan, or, you know, a start. The reason we are so pushing to do this as soon as possible is my understanding that when the sales tax measure does pass, it takes about 6 months to start reaping the benefit of the sales tax. It has to go through several things according to Mr. Albro. So if you can see your way clear to get this started now, then we can, you know, start reaping the benefits. We're also on a fixed income, and I don't consider myself poor, but we have to watch our money too. And so we're willing to do it, and I think that most of the people in the city would be willing to do it, especially to get help for our public safety people. We had an incident yesterday with the fire department where a lady died in a fire, and if the rescue truck had not been available, that building would have gone up. Evidently, there was no smoke alarm or anything. And the rescue truck got there, I heard it on the news, got there in about five minutes, which is great. And the lady died, but that's one of the reasons. If 3 or 4 things happen at the same time, you know, to cut any of our public safety departments is foolish. So I thank you for, you know, putting your thoughts in there and taking the time to get it figured out. It's very complicated, but I think you all could probably figure it out if you go to the knowledgeable staff and ask questions and come up with a plan. So thank you very much, and let's get started as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else rise, we'll close public comment and bring it back to council. I appreciate Councilmember Starbuck's suggestion. I approve of the breakdown. Unfortunately, I would like to see a tax pass, so I'd prefer the breakdown actually come back to council and we put it in language that would allow it to remain as a general tax. I'm sorry, we closed public comment. You're welcome to come back at the next round of public comment. So I agree that we need to address the major issue, but I don't believe that we should lock it down into a special tax and risk it failing when this is so desperately needed. So again, I support a sales tax, the 1% sales tax. I'm willing to consider a sunset that goes back to the voters to reapprove. And I like your breakdown. Again, I just want to prevent it from failing, so I'd much prefer that language be pulled out and it bring back to council for that breakdown to be approved once the general tax passed. Councilmember Vega.
I have a few questions for Dean, if I could, please. And again, thank you, Councilman Starbuck. I mean, I think we're all on the same page here. We want Lompoc to thrive and actually be business friendly. I want to support all our departments. But the budget issue is something that's always been primary. The tax is something else that we need to deal with. So, Mr. Albro, as far as the breakdown under this tentatively proposed special tax, okay, to pay back CalPERS, and it looks like what the other, I'm not sure what else you had on there, but I would think the public safety, streets and parks would be part of that.
So yes, 75% for the long-term debt. That would be the CalPERS.
So 75%, 25%, and is that how that would be distributed?
Yeah, that was
sort of?
what he proposed.
Okay,
yeah.
I wanted to make sure, I wanted to clarify that for me, myself, and the public.
Okay.
And then with the 15-year sunset, I believe the voters need the right to choose. Once again, I know it's easy to say we want a general tax. Under the numbers that the chamber put out here, it said they have 80% that would like sales tax. So it sounds like they have the majority already if this part of this survey was correct. So it seems like it's doable. Again, is there any other comments that you have versus the special tax here that maybe we're missing here, Dean, in your comments?
It's really going to be up to you guys to decide if you want a special or general.
Well, not the special or general, the actual percentages of what we're paying out as far as the breakdown. Okay, the 75% came from where and the 25%? Is that 75% based on paying back in 15 years, 12 years, something like that? Is
Yeah,
that what
pretty
that
close
is?
to 15 years, but again, it depends on, what the market's doing. I'm really happy I'm seeing the market run up a little bit here right now. I was a little concerned that it would hit flat coming to finish in here in June. Still got 4 more days, so everybody cross your fingers. But even still, it's a little bit faster than a 15-year, and you'd be paying it up front, and so you'd be paying a lot more of that interest, and it could be a little bit better than 15 years, but really it's almost right on pace with a 15-year at the 75% mark. Yeah, I don't know if you remember, I said if it was a full 1%, we would be able to aggressively get it at possibly 10 years, and that was probably being a little too optimistic, but you can get an idea of where that lands as far as with that 75 or 1%, or even if it was a 0.5%, it'd be almost be 30 years or 28 years, but if you understand the numbers, it's kind of interest on top of interest. It's kind of hard it's like skeet shooting. You got to try and figure out where it's going to be.
I got you. So let's just say that our CalPERS debt is paid off in 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 1 year left with the percentages open. Can they not also be transferred to the other?
Not with the special tax. Not the way this is set up. That would have to go into like a 115 trust.
Okay.
Or another long-term commitment. Depends on how you set the language too in the ballot measure.
Okay, so the ballot measure would be set. It couldn't be slid over to public safety and add on to that 25%.
Not with a special tax. No, you couldn't. Once
Okay.
you've decided what you're going to spend
So
on it,
it's
it has
set.
to be used for that.
Okay, I just wanted that for clarity. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Councilmember Mosby.
Yeah, Mr. Alba, come on down. I think it's important having a 25% kind of as a buffer.
Yes.
I think what Councilmember Vega was getting at is what would happen. As we've seen in the past, just a few years ago, we were able to make this, and come 2025 was going to be the peak, and now the peak's extending out. So we don't really know. We're kind of trying to hit a moving target, and that's why you would need a 25% buffer that you couldn't really spend committed on something else, because the important part is take care of the long-term liability that we have with the pension. And so that could go up to 90%, or maybe even 100+%, but you need to have that flexibility, that 25% cushion.
Yeah, the 25% would free up money in the general fund, so you can have flexibility with that portion.
The other side, because you're going to get what you were trying to cover right now. What's our total general fund payment to the? We're just covering interest on it right now, but it would free up a couple $1 million.
Yeah, it's
Approximately of
I don't know the
that
numbers.
component. So you're going to be shifting over, which would get the general fund back to what it was before without this debt. But having that buffer there will get you through the long-term commitment. Like Mr. Alvaro said, you could put it in the trust, into the pension trust, the 115. I think San Luis is doing something? One of our other neighboring areas is locking into the trust, what gives us, a locked up piggy bank to help out down the road that is committed towards the pension obligation.
Councilmember Cordova.
So I have a question. It would be my preference, and it was my understanding that the 25%, for example, well, let's start with the 75%. The 75% would go towards covering the CalPERS debt. Last time when I had asked the question, you had mentioned that doesn't cover the annual payment, that would cover the additional unfunded liability that is currently continues to grow, that is the moving target, correct?
Yes.
So the original payment to CalPERS would still be coming out of the general fund?
The normal cost.
Okay, so with the 25%, I would hate to think that that 25% is going to, I would want to think that that 25% is going to be above and beyond our budget for parks, public safety, and streets, rather than saying, oh yeah, well, now we have 25% over here, so we're going to cut general fund here next budget so that now it offsets because now we have 20. I would want this 25% to be above and beyond what goes into our budget so that we can afford to eventually put in our police positions and build back up, whether it's, parks or whatever. I would hate to see that get offset.
That's the way that is proposed, yes. You're
Okay.
correct.
Councilmember Vega.
We have been setting a precedence here to balance the budget prior to talking about a tax initiative. I think we're on the right track. I think we're on the same page. I think all of us, I think you can hear all of us that we hear you. We don't want the city to fail. We don't want our business community to not think that we don't have any faith in them. So I would like for us to continue this discussion on the budget, and then let's go back and see if we can come up with our budget proposal, and then we'll talk and finish our conversation on the tax measure. I'd like to still keep that precedence, that step one and step two. I think by majority, that's how we voted. Councilman Starbuck, he's done a lot of homework here also, and we've all kind of been beating our districts down to find out what they want. As you remember, we were all voted in by districts, but on the whole, we're representing Lompoc. My district is District 2. They have a lot to say. Everybody's district has, and I've actually walked those neighborhoods and gotten feedback from them, so I have to have a feel for their income level and their opportunity resources. They all are concerned with public safety also, They need you, we need you. So I'd like us just to continue on with the budget discussion tonight. That's what we're here for. And then we'll discuss any tax measures if we come to a consensus here tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Vega. And just as a reminder, only District 2 and 3 has been elected via districts. The other positions are at large, and the mayor remains at large, and the District 1 and 4 will actually be voted in 2020. So not everyone has actually been voted in by districts yet. Councilmember Mosby.
Yeah, Councilmember Starbuck, were you planning, what was your motivation or your next steps? Are you planning on making a motion to bring this back with a full discussion and independent analysis, or?
Councilmember Starbuck.
Well, I was going to throw rocks or styrofoam and see what floated here. That was the initial thing. And like I say, I just wanted to propose something. And I wanted to put my thoughts out. I didn't want everybody to come up again and we'd do an hour of public comment screaming, tax us, The writing, we know. We know there's no escape from CalPERS. We still needed to do our budget, but this kept getting in the way. It was very hard to do a budget when we were arguing about taxes that we hadn't even discussed. I tell you, I was looking for something very equitable here, and that's why I brought the offsets to the tax. I think if you want something, you should give something. And as a city, you just can't continually take, And I wanted to have some flexibility where this 1/4% public safety, parks, it gives Mr. Troop an option. It gives Mr. Albro an option. If we're not making the revenue to make our 15-year commitment on our PERS payoff, then we do have a small pot of money. If we can afford one more guy at the park, if we can buy 30 more Gopher Hawks, whatever it takes to do, this is what this whole thing was set up to do. I'm not a big tax person, but I do realize the benefit of 13 years, 15 years from now is saving $30 million. I don't think that in 10 years, I just don't see us able to do that, but I would love to be able to save $50 million. So the whole intent here was to just get some movement. I'd like us to have our PERS debt paid off, that monkey's off our back. Wastewater and the state revolving fund, that $5 million a year is paid off. We will at that point not have large bills. And the whole thing with this tax was to make it fair and make everybody happy, which isn't going to happen, but we'll see.
Councilmember Mosby, you still have the floor.
Could you come back with a slide showing the savings component? When you came up with that number, is that something that I think it'd be important, not saying that you don't know how to do the math, but making sure that the public understand through independent analytics to show that not only you know the number, but verifying it in order to, show the public.
Yeah, this is straight off the valuation report, actuarial report, so it would be very easy to do.
Okay. So be able to show that component. I could see some people arguing, well, the City Hall did the math, but if they had it up there with some.
I think the only tricky thing is our allocation program that we have. So you're going to have to do a lot of, okay, this is how much goes here, that's how much goes there. But overall, the top numbers, all those numbers are straight off the actuarial valuation reports. They're nothing tricky.
And this is paying off both the citywide payment, so it's also the enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a math equation with the 12-year component? Because I know you did at the Utility Commission, wasn't it a 12-year analytics you'd done there? Because you had a larger.
Brad had talked to utility commissions, but the 15, and I had to create some of the 10-year amortization schedules because they weren't in the amortization reports. But the 15 and the 10, I think it's in public safety. It's in one of them. But other than that, they're straight off the reports. And you could do a 12-year same way. You just take the present value, the discount rate, and periods. And
I'm just asking that. I think that, for the sales to the public being independently analyzed, I think it'd be critical to be able to show the full.
Definitely, I think it's always good to get even a person who's an expert in this field. I don't claim to be an expert in this field, but I've learned a lot.
And I guess the next question would be how soon before the city manager would be prepared to come back with a full discussion.
Well, for this part, there is a firm out there that has done it for multiple cities that will come through and present PERS overview of what it is. So it's something that they could come forth and say, here, verify what we have. I'm going to look to help with the city attorney on creating, if we're talking about ballot measure and everything too, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, really the question is what election date the council would want to have the sales tax measure on, because if we're going to look at the November 2019 election, we're going to have to move extremely quickly and have the ballot measure drafted by probably the first meeting in August, and that would be the meeting that we call the election, and that's cutting it very close. Because we're probably going to need some additional input from the council as we're drafting the ballot measure. If we're talking about March 2020, consolidating with the county at the March 2020 election, then the county has told us that October 24th is our last day to call the election for that date. And that gives us a little bit more time.
I'm just verifying for the November date too. I think can we do mail-in, or is that?
The only dates that we can do a mail-in only election are May 2020 and August 2020. The other dates, November 2019, March 2020, April 2020, November 2020, you still have your absentee ballots that you can do mail-in, but it's not a mail-in only election.
So we would have to have outside assistance, because Santa Barbara County is not doing elections this year because they're updating and changing their equipment or whatever it is. So we would have to find another agency. Santa Barbara County, it's pretty small. Okay. Santa Barbara County is using, not Santa Barbara County, Santa Barbara City is actually using LA County to run their election, because their elections are off cycle at the moment. They're trying to get back on a normal cycle. So that would be someone we'd have to reach out to LA County. Is that something we're going to do? Because that would mean polling stations and everything else. We'd have to look. I know Stacy is be shoot daggers at me saying, oh my gosh, how do we do this? Because we'd have to get some additional temporary help to come in, consultant to help. So it's.
And that's a November 2019 election. A March 2020 election would be run by.
Yeah, March 2020 would be the Santa Barbara County would be back online doing their own. So
it sounds like the March 2020 might be selling itself.
I'm like with one of the speakers, I'd like to do it as quickly as possible after more investigation on how it has to be done. And the one company that had done it in the past, all the owners retired, so they no longer do it. So that's why people are having to reach out to other counties that are doing sort of side jobs. Had we had the other business still in business, you could hire them, but they're no longer there, so it would be a tough one.
So could I make a motion that you come back as quickly as possible? Would that be, seems like you have some more homework.
Just for the miscellaneous plan, which is the non-safety group, it has the 10-year amortization schedule in that. It's a CalPERS provided document that schedule is showing, and it also shows the 15-year and the current existing 30-year. So at least for the miscellaneous group, the numbers are not something that was derived for us. It was directly from the CalPERS documents for our annual contribution valuation. What I did do in the utility commission meeting is, based on the allocation of the unfunded liability payments that are currently enacted in the budget, I broke that down between the 4 big utilities to show what the individual utilities costs are. But the underlying data is directly from the CalPERS systems valuation for contributions.
And that's one of the things that helped me sell it to me, but unfortunately I was the only council member at that meeting. That's why I was asking if you could, well, it sounds like you're going to be bringing back a presentation anyways. Thank you.
So again, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any additional questions for each other or staff?
One from the city manager.
Sure.
Just clarification, are we doing the 15, or are we doing a 12, or are we doing a 12 and a 15 and a 20? I want to make sure I have
Mosby?
the right numbers.
What I was looking for is to give us some options, if it's not too expensive to put together, 10, 12, 15, so we can see what direction we can give you. I've seen as it turns out, the 10-year numbers from that, so.
I'll work with Dean.
Seeing none, we will now vote. And that passes 5-0. All right. Agenda item 3, adoption of fiscal year 2019-20 GAN appropriation limitation, adoption of resolution number 6267, parentheses 19, from Management Service Director Dean Albro.
GAN limit, appropriations limit for 1920. So 1978-79, they passed Prop 4, which established the baseline for the GAN limit. 1990, they passed 111, which gave the option for different formulas. It gave us the option to adjust the GAN limit off that base year from the start for income increases, and ours was 3.85 for the state of California. It also allows you to adjust it based upon the county or city population growth. We didn't have anything here in Lompoc, but the county had 0.3. Currently, our appropriation limit is 46.7, and it applies to the GAN limit. I'm sorry, 18.8 is the actual GAN limit, subject to the limit. That leaves us 27.8 million margin, so we're not even close to the GAN limit. It's real short. This is a public hearing. I just ask that you accept the resolution. If you wanted to comment, we could go there.
Any questions for Councilmember Mosby?
Do you have Exhibit 3
The GAN limit?
on your presentation?
The county thing? I have it with me over there. You want me to grab it?
You can't put it on the overhead?
No, I don't have it on the overhead. I'm sorry. That's the county and the city increased population growth?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and you wanted to point out to the public that in 2001, the population here was 40,082, and population now, well, as of January 1st, 2019, was 40,994.
Yeah, it's funny because the thing that keeps pushing our GAN limit up is really the county population growth, not the city.
And how we actually bottomed out at, a couple times we bottomed out, but we were sitting around 38,000 people in 2007.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been a whole lot of growth going on.
It's been the county pushing that GAN limit up.
Yeah.
Any additional questions for Mr. Albro? Seeing none, we'll open the floor for public comment. If you'd like to speak on this matter, please step to the podium and you have 3 minutes. Seeing no one rise, we will close public comment and bring it back to council. If there is a motion, Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and move we accept Resolution 6267, parentheses 19.
I'll second.
Councilmember Vega has seconded that. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. And that passes 5-0. And now we bring the discussion back to unfinished business, item number 2, consideration and adoption of resolution number 6265, parentheses 19, adopting a biennial budget for fiscal years 19 through 2021, or adoption of resolution number 6266, parentheses 19, continuing city operations under the current budget up until July 31st, 2019.
I had to put that picture up because I think it's a great book. I think we did a really good job. I'm real proud of the crew. I'm a little prejudiced, but it's my presentation. Some of the things I wanted to comment about, one I wanted to comment was, we plan on using $300,000 or so of the general fund reserves to balance the budget. Another thing I wanted to mention is how the utilities have done. 2018, we had a 9.9% increase, or $1.6 million on our comprehensive annual financial report for the water fund balance. I think we're going to see something pretty similar to that. I think actually overall we're going to see pretty good fund balance increases for each one. Not quite as much as last year. I think it'll be a little bit less, I should say. Electric saw a 4.9% increase, or $2.2 million. Wastewater had 5.9, or $2.1 million. And solid waste had 29.8, or $500,000. So I just want to bring attention to the fact that this year I think we're on good pace for the utilities. We also plan on using $1.5 million of reserves in the other governmental or special revenue funds, and that's for the community development to continue the housing loan program. Another thing I think that's worth mentioning is we changed the methodology in this budget book on how we're funding our vehicles. We're not doing an allocation based upon our expense based on allocation of how many units you have. We actually are doing a pre-funding and actually pay as you go for the utilities, so we're separating the vehicles. One good thing is we should be able to get 4 new cop cars this year, so I just wanted to share some good news. Don't know if we're going to get a new fire truck. It's going to be close. It depends on how much the revenues they have coming in when they go out in brush trucks, but now that we're separating the funding, we should be able to give you monitors and tell you when we're going to have vehicles available for our public safety. So I wanted to pass on some good news. Then I recommend we adopt the resolution to push the budget forward.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, Mr. Albert, one of the questions I have, and I meant to get with you a little earlier, but I was so preoccupied with all the pictures and doing the other work with you. We're talking about enterprise reimbursement in here under general fund revenue projections. What I'm curious about is, we know there's a little controversy about how we're doing it, formulas, legally, is it defensible, et cetera. The money that we're taking out of the enterprises, with the exception of public safety, is going into a separate fund and we're holding it. Is this true?
We have the road fund money that's being separated in fund, right-of-way maintenance fund.
Right.
The public safety one goes directly into the general fund. And so, but
we're actually spending the enterprise reimbursement for public safety, though, with public safety. This
that portion does go in.
Right. Now, public facilities, are we using that money, or are we holding that also?
No, we're using that too. I would prefer that we had it in a separate fund and build it up, but right now, the way the general fund is, it's being used. It's discretionary based upon the study. That's another thing that in this budget cycle, we have money set aside to revisit that. We did that in 2016, but I think it's worthy to revisit it and vent that out.
There's been several hours of discussion with several of us here, and that's why I'm very concerned with that one, so thank you.
Councilmember Mosby.
Are we continuing the 3% reduction in electrical? There was,
For the rate study or the rates?
no, in here. For the 3% reduction, it was what, 2012 in electric? Are we continuing this or not?
I think so, yeah. It would be, unless you guys do an action, it'd be set to what you had it. I might have to ask Mr. Wilkie how long that authority is for that 3%.
There's no anticipated retraction of the 3% reduction?
Well, the authority ends with the end of this current budget cycle.
Oh, okay.
So a motion would have to be made to continue the 3% rate reduction in electrical rates, along with, I guess, is there any other changes that are in here as well?
That's not a change, it's just, it wasn't,
Extended?
the other rates for water, wastewater, solid waste, they've stopped. There's no more authority to increase any of those beyond the 3.6 that's sitting out there for solid waste, but that's a council action.
And what I was asking, is there any of these other changes that are happening that are just kind of rolling off the books without, really knowing it's happening?
Well, all the appropriations for the current budget expire at the end of this budget cycle, except for projects that are explicitly carried forward with carryovers.
I think there's a statement in the resolution allows them to be carried over.
Correct, yes.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any others like the electric utility rates, because that was explicitly meant to be expired in 2012, I believe, and it was extended with 2 different budgets going forward. So it's not had that.
And how much money is in electric's fund balance? Approximately?
Approximately 15 million. So,
How many million?
15.
15? I thought I saw 20 with the cash sheets with the treasurer's reports.
That's pretty close to the cash.
That's
20
Somewhere in
million.
there.
And then there's the loan being paid back from Wi-Fi of, what was it now, 4.6 million?
I think it's a little bit lower than that. I would have to look at it.
So it probably wouldn't hurt to continue the 3% rate reduction in electric through this budget cycle? I think there's close to $20 million in reserves.
But there are reductions in the requests from the department that have been deferred to allow for that to continue. So there are capital items that are not going to be able to be done for things like the 4 kV conversion.
And another thing too, is we move forward, if we do push this tax and go aggressively after the UAL, we're going to need some of that fund balance. And also in the budget, we plan on starting to come back with rates. So we're basically starting over, and you guys will have the decision of whether you want to continue or stay on course with lowering the rates.
Well, I think that was one of the things that if I had been going through here, I probably wouldn't have saw that it was rolling away, and the rest of the council wouldn't realize, in effect, it was a rate reduction, but now it's going to be a 3% increase. I think it's something we should be discussing. If they have $20 million in reserves over there and the 3% component, how much that is. We've been able to do it in the past. I think we very well potentially can get through that again. I would like to see a little more analytics on it than it just rolling off the sheets, so to say. I don't know, what does that 3% equal?
Well, you know, Brad, 20 million? Brad has a calculator.
It's about $600,000 a year.
So I guess my question would be to council, if that's something to think about and ponder, whether you wanted to continue that. And carry on, is there any, I know in the past we've seemed to create some policy through this budget book. Is there any policy being created, or my suggestion requested, if there's anything coming to that line, we bring it back through resolution to creating or terminating some past policies? Is there nothing?
Well, there are some items in there to separate some of the accounts from, based on audited recommendations. For instance, the water in lieu fee program has its own separate funding source and its own programs. Right now, it's just buried within the water fund, operating fund. And one of the things I'm suggesting we do in here is to separate that out as its own fund and own program, continuing it on as it is, but the $1 million or so that's in that would no longer show up as cash in the operating fund. It would be totally separate, and the operations of that would be totally separate. Same thing with the public benefit program. It has roughly $1 million, $1.5 million of that $20 million that you mentioned. That can only be used for public benefit programs. Right now, it's also buried in the electric utility. I'm saying in the transmittal, I added to the transmittal for that the city manager put out, that should also be separated out for transparency and to provide a better tracking of those activities by itself. So,
If I can ask the city manager, do you think that that's light enough that we don't need to bring back as a policy change? Or
No, I think it's actually, that would be more than I've ever experienced bringing that type of changes back. I don't believe it's a policy change. It's more of an accounting structure that does give better transparency, such as the other one in there that we discussed was actually creating a utilities administrative division. It doesn't add anything, but it pulls, like the current director, so Brad sits in just the water fund. And you're like, well, but he's over everybody. So what this is going to be doing is creating a separate piece so that you can see what is his total cost to run all of the operations, rather than having it housed over in water when it's really over all 5 or 4 of the utilities.
And the other thing I think you had mentioned in the past, that with the creation of a couple new positions, you're going to be bringing that paperwork back for us to approve the creation of the new position.
For like the building inspector and whatnot?
No, the grant writing position, the definition and such.
Oh, for the definition, we have to create all that. This would create the approval of the position, and then we'd have to come back with.
Okay, just trying to chew through a few of these things. Thank you.
Councilmember Cordova.
For clarification on the 3% rate increase, so did we, since it is set to expire at the end of this budget cycle, did we account for the increase in the budget, or did we not account for the increase in the budget?
Where's Melinda? There's Melinda. Melinda did our revenue projections for the utilities. I'm sorry.
We anticipated that you would want to keep the electric rate the same as it is right now, so there's no increase in the electric revenues. And over the past couple of years, we've actually seen our electric revenues go down a little bit because of solar power and such. So it's very consistent with what we had in the prior year.
Okay.
And all of the rates that we have for all the enterprise funds are based on just what they are now. So if we come back later on in a year for the solid waste, we'll be reviewing that. And any rate increases would have to be part of a Prop 218 hearing, and it's a big project, so.
Okay. Just because I would hate to go to the public for a 1% tax, and then on top of that, it turns out that you get a 3% increase also in your utility fees. So I agree. I think that if we can hold off for another 2 years, I would agree to that. Did the Utilities Commission, did they have an input into the actual budget? Is that a normal process? Is that something that?
So the budget book was presented to the city council at the last meeting on the 18th. The last utility commission meeting was the Monday before that, so they have not had a meeting since that time to review this.
Okay, because I would have recommended for them to take a look at it at least, since they are the commission responsible for that.
And normally we would, but we were just on such a tight time frame that we were barely able to get you guys your book, period, so. And I always like to give it to the council first, and then enough time that you could say, can we have the commission look at it? So you guys are looking at it, and everybody's looking at the same time.
Do we still have time for them to look at it?
They can look at it, sure, but not to adopt it.
Okay.
Our deadline's the 30th, and that's why we had this special meeting, so.
Okay.
If I may, they did have a brief discussion on the CIPs that are in the existing CIP book from last budget cycle, and they made a motion to carry that forward to the next meeting to look at it. So there's an opportunity for them to review it as an advisory group for the council at the next meeting. So.
Okay. Another question I had, at some point in time, I realized that it can't be done perhaps maybe on this budget cycle, but addressing the Wi-Fi for me would be very important, because I feel like that is a source of lost revenue, that we continue to invest money into something that does not work, that our public really hasn't bought into, didn't buy into it, and your input on that?
Yeah, I think we're at a turning point with Wi-Fi. It's about like that. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, because I would hate for us to continue to incur debt or loaning or anything of that nature if that's not working. I think we need to come up with a resolution to that. Also, another question I had, in this particular, when we talk about policy changes or whatnot, in this particular budget, I noticed that in the organizational chart that was provided, the city attorney is placed under the city manager, whereas in the last budget book, the city attorney is under the city council. What was the reason for that change?
That was just an error that we'll fix that in the final budget.
Okay. Okay, that's what I have for now.
Councilmember Vega.
Three things. We're looking for a budget adoption so we can move forward, so we won't extend our deadline on the June 30th. And we also, I think I would want to move forward with maintaining the 3% electrical rate reduction as part of the proposal, if that's possible.
It's totally possible. If you guys want to accept this budget, we can totally come back with the final budget.
And also, there were some questions that Councilman Member Mosby brought up as far as policy and any policy changes and any approval processes that come back to council. There may be some open-ended questions there. So, and then some input also with the Utility Commission would be really important to send that back. So I would make a motion to accept the budget.
We still need to do public comment.
Okay, well, I am commenting.
Okay. It's okay. It's just before you make a motion, we need to open the floor to public
I got
comment.
you, but I'm just venting my feelings, okay? If that's
Sure.
okay.
You can continue. I just wanted you to know
Yeah,
that.
you know, I think I will continue, okay? Thank you so
No problem.
much. So basically, that would be my thought process on moving forward. After public comment, maybe we could discuss that further. Thank you.
Historically, I believe that we should receive regular updates on any adjustments that need to be made. Say there is the acceptance of the tax measure and how it affects our budget and what additional revenue might be coming in, if there's any changes with cannabis tax and it becomes healthier. So at what rate would you recommend? Every 6 months? Annually?
It varies. I've been in different places. We've done it, 6-month intervals. With our 2-year budget, that might be the better one to do. I'm going to have to talk with Dean a little bit and see if with the new system, once the new system's up and running, we can have it set to actually spit out, if you will, a quarterly report. What would be really good is to have those reports and then to have a variance analysis that would highlight not every single variance, but you have a range. You say anything above this variance, we need an example of what's going on, and then we could do that. But I don't know, Dean's doing 2 jobs right now.
Right.
We're short, we're losing another person in accounting to retirement, so we're, that gopher machine you're hitting, just filling a hole while you can, so.
Well, we always like to do a mid-year update. I mean, that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on being very thorough on. We also bring back to you on quarterly stuff like investments, but I would love to have and migrate into a newsletter that tells you some of maybe the revenue streams that are happening with TOT, sales tax, and property tax. So those are some of the things that we'd like to do, but right now like I said, we always do a biannual. That's pretty important that we come back and let you know how the year's doing over the 6 months and how the prior year did with the CAFR. So, yeah.
So I'd like to see at least that 6-month sort of update, given the issues we're dealing with, and given potentially talking about a 6 months. So at least an overview that says, hey, here's an issue we see coming up, or hey, here's good news, and we're exceeding expectations, and just be able to stay ahead of us being blindsided by anything, because I suspect, given some of the communities around us, CalPERS is going to make another adjustment.
Yeah. So in December, we would come back with the results for 2019, but we'd also give you the projections of what was happening for 1920. And I would love to enhance and do more quarterly, so I'm hoping that I can get that to you guys.
Okay. Any other questions before we open it to public comment? Councilmember Cordova.
Another question that I had, Dean. In the budget book, there's a mention under revenues that there is a request for a reclassification of the revolving recreation Dick Dewey's Community Center, River Park Campground, and the Aquatic Center to be moved into the general fund. If that should be in the general fund, why wasn't it in the general fund before?
Good question. That was long before I got here. But one of the things that we did was we did move that in 2017 on our actual comprehensive annual financial reports, our financial statements. And it was based upon findings that those are really general fund activities. They're really just parks and rec that we were kind of, in the past, I guess they were trying to protect it, if you will, from, the general fund taking all the monies, but really they should be general funds. So we're kind of misrepresenting what we're doing. So that's why we made the decision to move them in there. I still like to move them around a little bit more so we actually can have more meaningful data when it comes out of those, but that's really where those funds really belong.
So real quick, and so usually, and I wasn't here at the time, but it's usually the external auditors that come in and do it will recommend making certain changes, and I believe that was the changes that they recommended that we do.
So if there was a surplus before in those areas, how was that money handled?
They were always considered enterprise funds, but actually when they were short, the general fund would actually backfill and vice versa. So really they were just extensions to the general fund. That's why they said, we don't know why you're doing that.
So how often was there, or was there ever historically any overages at the end of the budget?
Sometimes the campground you'll see them, but usually like the aquatic center, we usually subsidize the aquatic center.
Sorry. This was before Dean's time, but when I first got here and was in the Management Services Department, the revolving recreation program had built up a $135,000 debt to the general fund. And so when I got here, I recognized that and worked with recreation to have that worked off. So by the time that this change happened, that debt had been repaid. So that was one of the things that was something that kind of triggered this. And also back in 2011, one of the GASB pronouncements said that you need to take a look at things that are outside the general fund that are really general fund in nature, where they're discretionary and it's really just an accounting mechanism to keep track of things. So at that point in time, there were several funds that were holding funds that basically are passed through into the general fund. Most of those were moved over in 2011. In hindsight, when that occurred, those 4 or 5 funds should also have been moved over. What it does not do is it does not, on our financial system, They remain separate entities so that we can keep track of how much money has come in for recreation programs, how much money has come in for aquatic center programs, and how much we're spending on aquatic center programs. But when they're rolled up into the comprehensive financial report, they're rolled up into the general fund. So we're still keeping the integrity of keeping track of them and having the recreation groups accountable for their operations. But at the end of the year, they're consolidated together into the general fund. So we're not just moving them all and putting them all right into the single one general fund. We're doing that in a consolidation process, which we're continuing to do in the budget. So.
Okay, my concern, and the reason I asked my concern would have been that, especially for these departments or for these particular divisions, any surpluses that they would have at the end of the year, if that goes into the general fund and then gets lost in the whole of the general fund and they don't have access to that money, I think we've already spoken about some of the issues that the recreation division has. So I would hate for them to lose any money because it gets sucked into the general fund and then it doesn't.
They're really just extension of the general fund. It's like the library too is an extension of the general fund. So you could put them all in the general fund or you could keep track separately, but they're really just one big basket at the end of the day. That's how they show up on the financial statements.
Can I, real quick, Mayor, if I may. So that's one of the things talking to others is the general fund, people see it as one fund, one bank account. When it's really a multiple set of bank accounts, they're usually sub-funds, you can call them, and you have the general fund, which I forgot our number, what we call it, 110. You'll have other ones under that, and they'll be all, we can have, depends what series they're in, but at the end of the day, like in a budget book, if you go to the one section, it says $37 million. If you add up all the other funds, that will go back to the $37 million. And a lot of people don't understand that there's a multiple amount of funds that make that up. So it's not just one single fund. Sometimes that's a misconception, and people go through the budget book and go, well, wait a minute, they don't tie out, but that's because there's a multitude of them, so.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing no other questions, we will close that discussion and open it for public comment. Public comment is now open on the budget under consideration. Please step to the podium and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, I'm Ron Fink. I live in the city of Lompoc. And even though you opened up the meeting with kind of a shocker proposing a tax increase, I'd like to remind you that on Monday, you will be cutting a number of positions from the budget. The general fund budget still has a problem. Public safety, the fire department specifically, you cut their overtime budget. What that's going to mean is that the rescue crew won't be available for 9 months of the year. The fire chief's already testified to that fact. I didn't see any of you over at the fire on Saturday morning, but had that fire occurred and the rescue crew wasn't there, it would have delayed extinguishing activities until the second engine arrived, and it would have also delayed rescue activities because it was the fire department that knocked on doors and got the people out of that apartment building before the fire extended into the upper story. For Councilman Starbuck, you're the longest one that's been here, and in regards to this budget, which of the budgets that you approved lived through the whole 2-year process? Not one of them. They get changed along the way, so I think it's time to, even though the cuts are there, it's time to approve this budget and move on. I would urge you, though, to put a caveat in there. It sounds like you have community support for a tax increase, whatever it turns out to be. I would delay cutting those positions until the vote is in. I think you may want to talk to your finance guy, but there may be ample reserves to cover that bridge until that tax begins to come in. That way, you would be able to preserve specifically the rescue crew component. And you want to grow your way out of your problem. You can't do that unless you have planners and you have a fire marshal to review plans. That's what moves things through the system. There's a lot of pieces that make up economic development, and these positions that you're removing facilitate that growth. So once again, I would suggest that you might want to hold cutting those positions until the vote's in on the tax. Roll the dice, see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one else rise, we'll bring it back to council. I would like to remind the public that the positions being held are a full-time position in parks, a park maintenance worker, a park ranger at 3/4 full-time, police officers 3 full-time, and various city manager discretionary vacancies valued at of nearly $500,000. The positions to be eliminated are recreation office staff at 3/4 full-time, economic development office staff 1 full-time, a planning assistant, a planning associate, each at 1 full-time, code enforcement senior 1 full-time, code enforcement development service assistants 1 full-time, a battalion chief full-time, and the reduction roster for overtime of a little over $600,000. And so this will affect our ability to provide services. It will affect our ability to be supportive of the business community and the housing community as they build out. So this is a deficit budget because we have a gap of $300,000 that is being pulled from general fund reserves. So while those around you may call it a balanced budget, it is not. It is a deficit budget because we should not be using general fund reserves to cover operating costs. Councilmember Mosby.
One of the components that we do on council with the budget is we set funding at the department level. And going back and looking historically, going back 25 years in the budget books, the council had more control at the department level. But we spent a lot of time setting these marks at the department going along. But what has happened and transpired sometime was the then city manager, city administrator at that time, was able to shift money between departments under the same fund. And what I'm making is a recommendation that we hold that, and this is in the resolution, this will be under section 6, is that we hold that he's allowed to do a $100,000 shift between departments before coming back to council. So making it not to exceed the $100,000. And the reason for doing this is we saw some big shifting here in the recent past, and there was $1.4 million taken from PD. And us on council had no idea until the audit report came out, and roughly 9 months after the action had happened, it was brought to our attention. Of course, we cut a lot of flack for it happening. And I think it's important that if the city manager needs to raise his hand and say, hey, issues are going on, we need to do a budget adjustment, that they come forward, not every week, but you give them enough time. I've talked with the city manager about this, and it feels it'd be a good way for him to advise the public as well that I'm having to make this shift. And it would keep us more tuned in. Because the last time we saw that movement, it was 9 months afterwards, when we brought the audit book back for discussion, that we saw that movement had happened. And I know PD called me up and chewed us out for doing it when we had little or no control over that. So I'd like to add that component into the resolution that we have. As well as section 7 has some verbiage in there that I don't believe that us as council have determined, like the enterprise reimbursement, to be consistent with Prop 26 or 218. The enterprise reimbursement was entered in through the budget, and it was approved by the approval of the budget, not directly by the council. I asked with the city attorney, and section 7 we could actually remove out of this resolution while affecting the viability of the resolution. The other component, asking for a soft landing for the employees, so July 1st, it's not a pink slip termination, that we allow the city manager to go over this budget with 6 overhires with authority to reassign the positions. We have 6 positions that are still out there that are occupied. We give them that authority that gives them some level of flexibility as people transition, because we do have 28 or 30 positions available right now that they can transition into potentially, but giving the city manager that flexibility. Those are kind of the three main items that I see on the resolution that would make it so I could go along with it.
Mr. Troop, may I ask how often you would predict you coming back to council with a adjustment of $100,000?
That's a good question. I'm actually going to look at Dean and say how often in the past, because I haven't been here long enough to.
Not very often. Matter of fact, one time we did it, but we brought to council.
Okay.
Another thing, if I could bring up, you guys talked about the 3% reduction to electric. I don't know if you want to add that to the resolution.
Yeah, I'd add that as well.
If I may, is section 17 being suggested to be taken out entirely?
Section 7,
Yes.
I'd made the recommendation too.
To take it out in entirety? If you do that, then all $4 million of the general fund transfer from electric goes away.
My understanding of Section 7 is simply stating that the budget is in compliance with Prop 26 and Prop 218. And as long as the budget is in compliance with Prop 26 and Prop 218, I don't believe we need to state it. But if we need to discuss this, we can call a short recess. If the council wants to even consider that recommendation by Councilmember Mosby.
It's really just the first sentence that I'm concerned with.
I guess my biggest thing would be taking out the word consistent on the fourth line down, and are consistent with. I don't know, did anybody make a legal determination on that?
Based on what Mr. Wilkie's concern is, I don't think he or I would have any problem with just taking out the words "and are consistent with." I think that'd be fine.
Would that be okay with you, Mr. Wilkie, if you just did that much?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Starbuck.
I will second that motion with all the addendums to it also.
Does the city clerk and city manager and staff have all the information needed to make those changes? Looking for nods of heads from.
I believe so, yes.
If I may, one of the questions that was brought up was the 3% temporary reduction for electric. In talking with the city attorney, it would make sense to memorialize that as a new section in the resolution, just as amendment to your action.
I would agree to that.
As a seconder, I'll agree to that.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Any other clarifications?
I do have a question. For the staff that are being affected by the eliminations, you mentioned something about a soft landing or giving the city manager discretion in moving those employees around. I don't see anything in the resolution or the staff report regarding that. And my understanding was once the positions are eliminated through the budget process, they're gone. And you can't appropriate funds, or we'd have to return for additional appropriation of funds. So where are they being secured, some sort of income through July or June or wherever, December, or are they gone? Just looking for clarification.
Maybe city manager?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so the understanding, and I will ask our city attorney to help update the resolution, is that this would allow myself to continue those positions as we walk through to find out of the 28, 30 positions we have available, where can some of these positions land? We do have policies in place that, up to 30 days would be one of them if we had to go through that route and said, okay, there is nothing there for a particular individual. We couldn't find someplace for them to land, so there would be up to the 30-day period, but we would allow that ability that the soft landing, I guess it's very esoteric, but it's allows me to look and talk to the people to see what they have, what kind of experience they have, what are the different functions they can do, and it gives me more time to look through the openings and best place people in different positions, or at least allow them to have that as an option.
Okay. Councilmember Cordova.
Would it be possible to adopt the general fund budget and without necessarily, and I don't know if this is possible, without necessarily approving the portion of the enterprise funds and allow that to go back to the Utilities Commission for review? I don't want to get specific into the numbers. I just saw some spikes in some of the numbers on the enterprise funds, and we're supposed to have it all done by June 30th, and to adopt, I've never heard of anyone adopt part of it because you're adopting the full budget. I don't know, Cindy.
Yeah, there is a June 30th deadline to adopt the budget, and every part of the budget affects other parts of the budget, so it's difficult to do it piecemeal and not legal unless we were to extend the entire adoption of the budget.
The other consideration would be the first pay period of the year, none of the utility employees would get paid.
okay. And I have my own concerns about the overall vision of our budget. When I looked back at the prior year's budget, and I felt like we had, and I wasn't part of that budget, but we had some very specific goals set. In this particular budget, we have more generalized goals set, with the number one goal being ensure a safe and supportive city through a fully staffed and equipped public safety department. However, I don't feel that we're doing that. But again, in the spirit of compromise, I think that we are moving forward tonight, and I would hate to hold back anything due to my only opinion. Another one that kind of struck me was when we put as number 3, provided support a partnership that empowers community members and volunteers the ability to improve Lompoc. I feel like we're telling the community, it's your job to improve Lompoc now, whereas before we had very set goals and priorities to how we were going to improve Lompoc as leadership and staff. So I just wanted to put that there.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, Mr. Troop, one of the things that I'd like to make sure that happens here is I know that we're going to do budget reviews, and that's going to be done financially through Mr. Albro and stuff, but when you do these reallocations of people and some of this other stuff, you can make that available through the personal position details in the budget so we can keep the book up to date at the same time as budget reviews?
We can do amendments to it. I mean, once this is adopted, we then would have to add in, an amended column to that, so we can.
That is something we've never done in the past, was the amendment or anything like that, and I think it's important to know so we would have the continuity in there.
Councilmember Mosby.
In answering Councilmember Cordova's concerns with utilities, and I know it's been my challenge as well, and my utility commissioner's challenge as well, is to have the utility commission take a larger part and to step up. And I think that Mr. Wilkie's committed to doing this as well, that they have more review, like of capital projects that are coming forward. They have been doing more of that. So seeing a lot of these movements and numbers in here, they had some different accounting practices, I think they were in there, in the utility enterprise components with depreciation and such that was and wasn't being accounted for at this time. So you'll see some of the movements in the numbers are because of some of the modification of accounting principles. But likewise, there's a lot of capital projects that are in here. So you'll see some numbers go up because there was anticipation. And I think they said and decided that if they didn't put them in, you have to do major budget modification because it's easier to take them out if they decide not to do them. So that's what a lot of the lumpiness that you saw in there, I believe. But I'm trying to commit the utility commission to oversee more of what is in the resolution governing them. And I think it's happening.
Councilmember Cordova.
Yeah, and if we're going to talk about capital improvements, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there's a capital improvement list somewhere out there that I still haven't gotten because it's my understanding it was never adopted or it was meant to be brought back and then it hasn't. So again, my concern is always that we push things off and we say we're going to fix them later and then we don't get around to them. And I would love to see an actual change where we start actually chipping away at the things that we need to fix root and fundamentally with our processes, with our policies, with our budget, with our numbers, so that we can begin to see a change in the future for Lompoc.
And I agree. If I could, the capital improvements are at the end of the book, so you still are adopting them. So all the capital improvements that were submitted, all the capital improvements that were approved, they're in the back of the book. We usually like to do the narrative and expand it a little bit more, and that's something I would love to bring back in the summer when we start looking at development impact fees. We just got a little over our workload, a little too much there.
So in one of the last meetings, though, when I asked the question and I said that I thought the capital improvement list should go hand in hand with the budget, I was told that that was handled separately.
Yeah, the capital improvement program, it's the expanded binder where we do more detailed, but I just wanted to let you know that it's part of the budget that you're adopting tonight.
Okay.
And I still want to bring that back to you, and I apologize for not being able to do it this year. Last year was the first year, last budget cycle was the first time we actually did it. So it's a process of growing pains, and we did have a lot of new implementations for our software and a lot of deliberation about the general fund that really slowed us down, so.
And with the capital improvement, if we are adopting one tonight, I would have loved to have seen the cost breakdown of what those projects will be. Is it in this book?
Just what's be approved in this budget cycle. So normally we try and do 6-year capital improvement program.
Right.
And actually we do an assessment of 15 years. Usually we compress it to 6. And we try and show you what our plans are. And that's why I also said if you guys have ideas you'd like to do, that we can go out and research and figure it out and bring it back. I still want to bring that back. It's usually hand in hand with the budget book, you're correct. But we still need to approve the appropriations for the capital improvements they are going to do in this budget cycle.
So is the retrofit of the fire station in here?
No. But that would be a perfect candidate for inside the 6-year program or assessment, yes.
Mayor, if I may, for the fire chief, would like to make a comment about the fire marshal.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I just wanted to bring up the fact, I don't know if you're totally aware of this, but that elimination of the BC's position is the fire marshal's position. And the fire marshal would end up going to a 56-hour work week, which is a 24-hour schedule. So the fire marshal's position will no longer be available except for maybe 9 times a month. And and she will be working, or he, on a 24-hour basis. So that gives you just the time during the day. That fire marshal will also have a lot of collateral duties that goes along with being an operations BC. Right now, the fire marshal's position is overloaded, and she can't meet the demands of the job right now. I mean, she does so many things, new business inspections, weed abatement, fire cost recovery, fireworks, new daycare inspections, engine company inspection coordinator, plan reviews. All this cannabis that's coming in, she is doing all the plan reviews on this. It's creating tons of work. Yet you guys want to remove it. The fire marshal's position is probably one of the most important positions in the city. The position isn't the one that everybody sees. It's not the glory position. The guys on the fire the other day, there's the ones that everybody sees. The fire marshal works behind the scenes, and she keeps us extremely safe. Without that position, we're putting the whole city in jeopardy. And I think that we should take a second look at that and make sure that position still stays intact.
Thank you. Councilmember Cordova.
And again, speaking of that, would this be one of the positions that would be in the discretion of the city manager to not immediately just eliminate, but actually watch and see based on what's going to happen?
That is one of the positions out there, yes.
Okay, and then, you know, to the point of our fire chief, again, that's one of my other areas of discomfort when it comes to the future of Lompoc and what we're adopting, because we will never be business friendly as long as we're eliminating positions that, you know, we are gonna have new homes coming up, so there is inspections that are gonna be required. We just adopted a whole new business and, you know, that came into Lompoc with the cannabis. That requires its own regulations and inspections that are required in part also by our fire department, if I'm not mistaken. And also eliminating planners. I mean, again, we're never going to be business friendly and say that we're going to grow our way out of this, or there's economic development in the future of Lompoc. There won't be when we continue to cut those essential positions that make it more efficient and better. Business friendly to me would be somebody comes to the counter and they actually have a clear direction as to what they need, the process that they will need to go through to get through our city counter. And that's never going to happen because we just don't have enough people at that counter, or we don't have enough people doing the work to make us efficient. So we're just looking at it as we're going to cut that position because we can't afford it. But that's just not smart in my mind. So again, it buys into what Mr. Fink said about the fact that we need to look at economic development too. So,
Councilmember Mosby.
And to answer Councilmember Cordova's, we are adding a building inspector and a plan checker. They will be here as employees and not the contract component. So,
okay,
there
so
are
it won't be
additions coming.
contract.
Yeah.
It is going to be contract?
No, it won't be
okay.
contract.
Okay.
So there are.
May I comment on that?
Are we finished with the discussion between both council members before I yield the floor to staff? Councilmember Mosby. Yes, but we're still in discussion of the motion, and it's still absolutely allowed. Staff.
I just want to caution council, you're eliminating 2 planners. Yes, you're adding 2 to the building division, so you're just shifting. I think the other day we heard public comment where they said, the planning division's okay, they're kind of easy to work with. The building division's terrible. You're just shifting it right now. So you're giving me 2 building division employees, but you're taking away 2 planners. So if this had been at the discretion of the directors on how to change operations to meet the budgetary constraints, I wouldn't have done it this way. I would have gotten rid of 1 planner and added 1 building official, so we had no contract employees at the city within the community development department. So I do want to add that because I think we're eliminating numbers of people. You're not really looking at the operations of that department. So just cautioning you, do not assume because you're adding 2 positions that everything's going to be perfect over there. We're going to be adding contract employees now on the planning side. 44 new homes coming. Cannabis is going nuts. A lot of hand-holding needed there. Planners do that.
Thank you. Councilmember Mosby.
Can we call for the vote?
You may call for the vote. Before we vote, I will clarify that I do not support this budget. I do not support these cuts. It is not addressing our public safety issue. We are close to discussing a potential sales tax that would have, yes, I realize you called for the vote, and I'm clarifying my no vote. So, I think we should have not eliminated any of these positions. Let's vote. The motion on the floor from Councilmember Mosby is to accept the current budget with the adjustments to the wording in section 7 to remove the consistent with, to add the flexibility to the city manager regarding 6 positions that need to be eliminated and potentially filled by other open positions that are not being eliminated. And I am forgetting the third thing. There is a third thing.
There were 2 other things. One was to add a section to the resolution continuing the 3% reduction in utility rates.
6-month reviews.
And the last item was to add a $100,000 cap to transfers, to the authority that the city manager has to make transfers between the departments within a fund in the budget without going to council.
Okay. All right. Let's vote. And that passes 4-1. City Clerk, do we have any written communications?
Nothing more than you've already received.
Okay. You have oral communications, 2 minutes to speak on any city-related matter. Seeing no one, oh.
Good evening. I'm Salva Trees McGinty. And one thing I want to let you know how devastating is it to have some council in here representing the city of Lompoc. You should be leader of concern, not selfish people who are not caring about what's going to happen to Lompoc. You mentioned Lompoc is going to fall. It's because of you, because of what you stop in the community to do. You have a job. You're going to go home on Monday and have a job still. People are going to lose not only their job, their security, their safety because of you. It's embarrassing. I do thank you so much, mayors, because what you say makes sense. Doesn't take a genius. You don't operate on a budget that is in deficit. You don't. And it's sad to see that those people don't see it. So we'll hope for the best.
Thank you.
Anne Rouget again. Christy Alarcon left out one thing. When you start moving positions or getting somebody from one department into another, the positions that you have chosen to eliminate take a lot of training, a lot of education. Planners take a lot. They go to seminars all the time. Building fire marshal has been several training sessions. There's nobody to fill those places. Number two, I didn't realize commissions had any say in anything. I've been on a couple commissions. I was on the Planning Commission. We did make recommendations. Now I'm on the Library Commission. If I knew I could get input on the budget, we would have done it. It's my understanding that commissions are advisory, and to hold up, this whole system so the Utility Commission can have input is unneeded. They're supposed to be advisory, and they can say yes or no, but I think you've made a huge mistake, and you're putting us all in jeopardy.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, City Council, members of the community, my name is Anthony Hudley. I'm president for the Lompoc Professional Firefighters Local 1906. I just wanted to come up and echo what Mr. Fink said earlier. He had some great recommendations on maybe not even implementing certain position cuts in the budget, but maybe keeping an eye on it and seeing if it's something that's necessary, especially with you proposing a budget. First, thank you for brainstorming and coming up with an option. However, just was pointed out for us right now with Station 1 is there's a 6-year timeline now that you're actually going to deal with it. It's been deemed seismically unsafe. So where's the priority for us? You talk about public safety. They said it was number 1. Nobody's talking about the firefighter safety. That's number 1 for us as well as the community. So now we're still going to be working in a station that is unsafe, for the record. And cutting the fire marshal position, that's a problem. So now more work is going to come down to the engine companies where we're going to try to do our best to inspect a lot of these businesses as well as apartment complexes. But just like the structure fire they just had the other day, it got to the 2nd floor. There was a fatality. Somebody passed away in that fire. That's going to be the reality of the city. So the challenges are still going to come. Rescue is going to be unavailable. We don't have a fire marshal on a 40-hour work week, getting the business done, helping the community grow. And I also am curious with LAFCO's thought of cutting our services. The 2 developments that are slated to go up on the north side of town have been supported by LAFCO with their current response force that we have. So if you want a Bailey Corridor build out, thinking that that's going to save the city, I guarantee you LAFCO is not going to buy off on that because they barely bought off on the new developments up there. So every single decision you make has a catastrophic outcome that comes with it. So I hope the city manager, if this is the fire marshal, that's the position that you're going to be able to look for and keep it in place. I ask that you do everything you can, not only for our community, but for us as firefighters as well. And again, we'll still come up here and express to you our concerns about our safety, because somebody needs to. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else rise, we will close oral communications, and we will adjourn to Lompoc City Council meeting on 6:30 p.m. Tuesday, July 2nd, 2019.